The multitasking myth. According to Daniel Levitin, neuroscientist and author of The Organized Mind, the brain's ability to multitask is a myth. Check out his video here.
Turns out that multitasking is a myth. We think that we're doing a whole bunch of things at once, but we're not actually, because the brain doesn't work that way. And a number of studies now have shown, from Earl Miller's lab at MIT and others, that what we're really doing is we're paying attention to one thing for a little bit of time, and then another, and then another, and then we come back round to the first. And all of these are separate projects that are occurring in separate parts of the brain. They require a separate start time, a separate monitoring process. And you end up fractionating your attention into little bits and pieces, not really engaging fully in any one thing. All that switching across tasks comes with a neurobiological cost. It depletes resources. So after an hour or two of attempting to multitask, if we find that we're tired and we can't focus, it's because those very neurochemicals we needed to focus are now gone. There are some jobs that require not multitasking because we know it doesn't exist, but this kind of rapid switching. I'm air traffic controller, simultaneous translator at the UN, journalists, monitoring all these different things at once. And we can take a tip from the air traffic controllers who, as part of their duty cycle, are required after every hour and a half or 2 hours of work, it's mandated that they take a 15 to 30 minute break. And that means an unplugged, disconnected break where they go for a walk or they listen to music, they exercise, something to restore all of the burned up neurochemicals. You might ask, during this period of our evolution when there's all this information, is the brain adapting and changing? And yes, it is. The brain adapts and changes all the time. Evolution is happening all the time. Unfortunately, it's rather sluggish. We talk about it in terms of evolutionary lag, and generally speaking, it takes about 20,000 years for the brain to catch up with the way the environment is, and in terms of how it's encoded in the genome. So 20,000 years from now, our brains may have evolved to deal with it. In the meantime, we have to employ strategies, just a little bit more self-discipline than we currently use, to filter out unwanted or unnecessary input. I'm not talking about never letting something frivolous or fun in, but I'm talking about adopting a kind of a habit of allowing yourself to focus on one thing at a time for at least a few hours a day.
So if it is true that the brain can only attend to one thing at a time, and it is actually rapid switching between tasks, fractionalizing its attention and not really engaging in any one task, then what can we make of Zeigarnik's theory of the benefit of interruption? Does Levitin's proposition about multitasking debunk Zeigarnik's belief that you can increase memory and retention by stopping people at the moment when they were most engrossed in their work? If, when the brain is attempting to do more than one thing at a time, it depletes the neurochemicals needed to think productively, then is it a good idea to interrupt students often to increase their memory? What does this mean to educators and how we give classroom assignments to our students? Do we give shorter assignments with frequent breaks? Do we intentionally interrupt students when they are engaged in a task? Does this help them retain more information? It's a confusing world out there for the teacher who wants to design their instruction on best practices and proven research. How can we make informed decisions regarding brain research and cognitive psychology and apply them to our classroom setting? I think, as educators, we need to sift through the many studies of brain research and evaluate whether they all apply to the pedagogy of teaching. We can't take every theory as gospel truth and start implementing them in our classes without knowing our students, their needs, and how that theory would affect their learning. This was the conclusion that Case Hook and Martha Farah came to after interviewing educators who attended Learning in the Brain conferences. Their informal research asked the question, what can neuroscience offer educators? Hook and Farah found that educators are eager for innovative methods to improve student learning, but that they may lack the scientific training needed to critically assess the methods of neuroeducation. Teachers know that understanding how the brain works will help them be more effective teachers, but in the past few decades, the amount of research that has been published about neuroscience is staggering and sometimes conflicts with itself. Then they are forced to decide what to believe. Here are some things that educators can take from studying neuroscience. First, if we understand how the brain works in children and adolescents, and that the prefrontal cortex is slow to develop, it may give us more patience when our students don't make the quick progress we would like to see. Second, by staying informed about the latest findings in neuroscience, it can add to our credibility with parents and colleagues. And finally, as educators, being well read about how the brain works can give us a sense of professionalism in our job. So to answer our initial question, does the myth of multitasking mean interrupting doesn't increase memory? According to Hook and Farah, we need to take each theory and use it as a way to think about our students, using what works best to explain or justify what we know as educators works. If we believe that teaching is truly an art and a science, then well-informed educators will take what they learn about how the brain works and apply it skillfully and discreetly to the many varied needs of their students.